Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Seraphim, written by In Yellow Clad. The noble houses of the galaxy were confident in their superiority, masters as they were of genetics, biomechanical technology, and everything else one could think of. Though governments ran each species, and there was a governing body of representatives to ensure stability amongst the stars, the Confederacy was in truth controlled by these noble houses, and they made sure everyone knew it. It caused issues now and then, especially when two houses began to get snippy with each other, thus causing them to use their puppet representatives to levy tariffs and embargoes against their rivals. And then humanity showed up. Humans, with their desires for freedom and exploration of the galaxy, full of wonder and zeal. They were welcomed into the Confederacy with open arms. And then things got bad. The noble houses scrambled to get humanity into their pocket, either through coercion, simple and friendly diplomacy, or force. Diplomacy was met with friendly talk and some trade deals, but nothing concrete. No pledges of allegiance or anything like it. But coercion and force were met with humanity's answer to each, a very big stick. Now, the noble houses had their power projected through the use of the very specific form of machine, mechs. They came in all shapes and sizes. Many were mass-produced for the soldiers of each house and then customized slightly. But the actual nobility got custom mechs, each one tailored to their specific needs. Some were masters of engaging a target from miles away, without ever once being seen. Others would get up close and personal, tearing other pilots from their vehicles in brutal melee combat. It didn't help that humanity was also seen as physically inferior as well, being smaller than many of the Confederacy's member species. The noble houses maintained their dominance with these mechs by snuffing out any competition to their mechs. Any who attempted to make their own were quietly either bought or killed. They did this several times with human inventors, which sparked a brief war of retaliation by humanity, and they quickly learned mechs do not do so good against an orbital strike, but such strikes are not always applicable. And so, humanity discovered that their own mechanized forces were no real match for the mechs either. As for one customized mech, you needed 50 human tanks just to disable them. Humanity, humbled, ended the war and suffered the consequences. They were humiliated publicly and forced to pay a tribute. But humanity doesn't forget, and neither does it often forgive. Plans were set in motion, and while the noble house lauded their victory over humanity and gloated in their faces, the humans developed a plan to knock them down a few hundred pegs. That was nearly 80 years ago. And now the noble houses convene on the planet Perilia. It's a desert world, not overly inhabited, and is generally the center of a massive annual competition between the houses to show off their advancements in power. It also requires that the galaxy sets aside their duties to watch the tourney, even if they really don't want to. Just another reminder of who is really in charge. So, that is where this little story begins. On a desert planet, with tumbleweeds blowing across the street. My name is Arnold, and I am the second son of House Priliad. I am also the house's mech champion, the best there is amongst the other pilots within the house. I am champion of 4 tourneys, and hoping to put a 5th under my belt, as the humans say. To everyone else, many just see me as another Grelper, a cephalopod species that's adapted through centuries of natural evolution, but also genetic manipulation, to survive on land without the need of a wetsuit, or anything to keep us damp. I pilot Jath 2 years, or, for the humans that might be reading this, Dread Queen. That's my mech, and it is the best there is. Not even the Scalpy have managed to make anything even close to its speed, power, and durability of my Jath 2 years. She's been in countless battles, each handled neatly and quickly without barely a scratch left on her paint. She has a large central body, where most of the heavier weapons are, and 10 tentacled appendages that extend from the bottom, using the latest repulsor technology she's able to move through the air and over the ground as if she were darting around underwater. And should she actually end up underwater, she won't suffer any slowdown in her speed. If anything, she'll go faster, as I don't have to shunt the power to the repulsors. I shouldn't brag. She is a beauty, a deadly one at that, and it's unbecoming of a noble such as myself. Regardless, I stood beside one of the gently curled tentacles of my mech, looking over the diagnostic feed on a tablet held in one of my tendrils. Unlike her, I had 8.
My lord, are we expecting anyone else to show up? I thought we were the last to arrive, like always.
A technician said, and pointed towards an open hangar doors which were filled with a shimmering force field to keep the oxygen in. As always, our grand carrier was the last of the noble ships to arrive at Perilla.
No, we should be the last, just as you say,
I respond, turning two of my eyes to look at the pen expanse of space. As I stare out into the void, a shape slides out of the shadows, and I couldn't place the design. It is a strange ship, large enough to carry a good assortment of people, but nothing large enough for a battle. Even as I stared, it slid into position amongst the other large ships and just sat there. Perhaps someone wanted to spectate the tourney in person.
Pay it no heed, it's not our concern. Come, let's get this power coupling installed before we deploy,
I say, and the technician nods, getting back to work. It doesn't take long for myself and the just to us to be conveyed down to the arid and hot surface. But once we're comfortable, the general celebration begins. As the commentators go through their typical spiels on intergalactic channels and who the rumors say will win, I look over the competition. Some new faces, especially amongst the shorter-lived species. Nothing I needed to worry about, it seems. I know their strengths and weaknesses already. My victory is all but assured. An assistant approached and leaned over to whisper,
My lord, there seems to be a new contestant.
He murmured, and my eyes widened. Where? I do not see them, I say, surprised by this. If there was someone new, then they should have been announced by now.
They refuse to leave their mech, and it is a strange one. It looks weak, though, easy for just to us to crush.
That was a relief. Now and then someone came to one of these tourneys with something ramshackle, hoping to prove themselves. Though we were all forbidden from killing each other, such upstarts inevitably found themselves on the receiving end of a terrible and often lethal accident. Such a shame.
Very well, I shall enjoy playing with them,
I chuckle, smirking to myself and sipping on a glass of Verby wine, all while eyeing up one of the servants, a particularly buxom story lady who was quite obviously flirting with me. The call sounded, and we pilots rose, finished off our drinks and food, and then retired to our mechs, preparing for the coming battle. Hours later, we stood deployed, and I looked around for the upstart in our midst. If only I had known, perhaps I would not have been so eager to face them. Initiating wake-up sequence. 10%, 45%, 90%, 100%. Wake-up sequence complete. Reactors online, sensors online, motor control systems online, weapon systems online, ECM systems online, EWS systems online, taunts online, pilot link online, pilot neural net detected. Initiating handshake protocols. Handshake complete. Transferring control to pilot. Welcome, Captain. This is SR-1776, reporting for duty. You may call me Seraphim. I look forward to working with you. I spotted the upstart and was unimpressed. Their mech did look weak, for it was slim and slightly boxy. But there was something about it that was unsettling. Perhaps it was the lack of anything even close to resembling a face. Perhaps it was the paint scheme, which looked worn and faded. The armor pitted with old wounds that had not been repaired. Perhaps it was the fact it wore something akin to a cape that was draped over one shoulder, hiding an entire arm from sight. All in all, it looked like it shouldn't have been walking. And yet, it was. It looked more battle-ready than any of our mechs, and that was concerning. We had all seen battle, but it had been a short-lived battle, as the enemy surrendered the moment they saw us. Or if they didn't, they never lived long enough to do anything about us. As the current president gave his long-winded speech, I attempted to run scans on the newcomer, as I'm sure everyone else was doing, only to be countered with a crude image of a human female bent over with their naked posterior on display, but covering their genitals with a human hand gesture, one I knew to be insulting. The image was forced onto every screen within John Tuath, and I growled softly in annoyance and indignant anger at such a rude display. My scans didn't detect anything either. Whatever that mech was made out of absorbed any scanning sweeps that passed over it, which was technically a big demerit for them, as all mechs were meant to submit to scans, though perhaps they had. Maybe they had activated some sort of countermeasure to keep us from seeing anything. Regardless, the rules were gone over for the newcomer's benefit, and I used a tendril to pick up a piece of meat from my teeth, only now noticing the slight stain upon my white uniform. Fast! How long had that been there? As the rules concluded, and the president asked if the newcomer understood everything, they only gave a thumbs up. Another human gesture. Strange. I noticed the machine moved far too fluidly for something that had the same or similar control systems we all used. Way too fluidly. Something wasn't right. I didn't get to think about it too much, however, as we were all teleported to our starting location. This was going to be a classic battle royale. Last mech standing wins. We played till the mech either couldn't fight or was so damaged it powered down or went critical. Though, if the latter was going to happen, we were honor and rule-bound to assist the pilot in evac to avoid a death. So far, I've never needed to do that. I looked around my starting area, preparing the weapons and movement systems, feeling Jatuath bob around me as her tentacles flexed. A countdown appeared on each screen, and I flexed my tendrils, ready for a fight. When the countdown ended, we burst into motion. I hate desert planets. Too little cover, too little cool air and shade. Just sand, rocks, and more sand. But out here, without anything to get in the way, I can run as fast as I want to, without breaking my stride. Out here, I am top dog, and these stuffy nobles are going to learn that the hard way. Seraphim is new to me. My last mech didn't make it, and was too damaged to recover everything. So they gave me this one. Well, more like I was a replacement for the pilot, as Seraphim had lost theirs. Feels weird. Familiar, yet weird. Like I've got the pilot rattling around in both our heads. I'll get over it. I have high ground to acquire and targets to put down. The opening moments of the tourney were quite hectic. Everyone scrambles for the best positions, the choke points, the high ground, the concealment. Anything goes, really, so long as nobody dies. I, for one, wanted to net my first kill, and went after another. The tendrils of my Dread Queen tearing apart a smaller mech and leaving it defenseless as I dropped the chassis unceremoniously. I heard the boom of the cannon fire in the distance, the crackling sizzle of energy weapons, and then something new. A single piercing crack of a weapon as it fired. It did not fire with the rapidity of the rotary cannon, nor did it sound like any sort of energy weapon either. Perhaps a precision kinetic weapon. Probably, most of the time, those weren't used at all by mechs. Why be precise when you can just mow down everyone with sustained and indiscriminate fire? What were a few civilian casualties anyway? I moved on from my first kill and sought out others. I hoped the upstart would get their dues by my tendrils by the end of the tourney. I'd be very disappointed if someone else got to them first. Targets on field acquiring firing solutions. Solutions acquired. Compensating. Firing. Reload. Solution acquired. Compensating. Firing. Reload. 2 targets down. 2 more on scopes. Acquiring firing solutions. Deploying chaff and EWS. Computer intrusion countermeasure online and active. Enemy computer systems have been breached. Initiating remote control. Puppet Master online. Acquiring new targets. Targets acquired. Acquiring firing solutions. Coordinating with puppet systems. Solutions acquired. Commencing attack. The battlefield had grown quiet as the sun began to set. Sometimes these things took days to complete, and this was looking like one of those times. But I received a confirmation that many of the others had been eliminated already, which left myself and 3 others, which included the upstart. Slithering through a canyon, I popped a few drones into the air to catch sight of my enemy and saw 2 of my opponents moving with disturbing synchronicity. They were also blasting the airwaves with chatter, frantic chatter at that.
It's a trap! Systems jacked!
I didn't need to hear everything. They were no longer in control of their mechs. Fools! Didn't have any decent electronic countermeasures. But then I looked at them more closely, and they were from the houses that were tied for second most powerful in the galaxy, just below my own. They were also the undisputed masters of electronic siege defense. So something had breached their defenses that were nigh impenetrable, and taken control of the machines. I felt concern because there was only one other person around besides myself that could have done this. Or it was a trick on their part to make me think the upstart was bigger danger than they really were. I took aim at the mortar system. The tracking munitions would come from the sky, and hopefully the point defense systems would not swat them away. With my targets acquired, I fired, the mortars puffing softly as they sent the rounds screaming into the air. Most didn't make it, but the few that did landed and sheared off the limbs of the puppet mechs, causing their pilots to breathe sighs of relief as they were finally taken out of the battle. Which just left me with the upstart, who my drones could not detect at all. I slipped out of the canyon and began a visual search, only for a sibilant whisper to pipe through my comms. The Dread Queen slowed down considerably as some great strain was put upon her systems. I nearly panicked, trying to reset everything before I received a warning. Target lock detected. I looked up, and just as the systems came back online, I caught a glint of light in the distance as the upstart fired. I dodged the heavy round, whizzing right past the reactor vent, and the shockwave of its passing buffeted me. Final combatant locked, acquiring firing solution. Solution acquired. Good tone. Firing. Target miss. Reacquiring. I put all the speed and Dread Queen could muster into closing the distance between us, my cannons pounding the area ahead of me to kick up a screen of debris that should hopefully confuse their targeting systems. But instead, I caught a glimpse of the enemy rising, their capes shimmering as the cloaking technology deactivated, and lifting their large rifle and charging a lever along the underside of the belt-fed weapon. A single, gleaming brass shell was ejected, and presumably another slid into the chamber. They fired again, presumably not waiting for the targeting computers to acquire a target lock. They just kept firing, not even shifting from their position, till I started shooting back. And then they were twisting out of the way, and the motion was far too fluid for a mech of that design. They acquired me and kept shooting. They moved with such skill and practice that I was certain they were prior military, and that made my foe all the deadlier. But they were no match for me in close combat, no match for the Dread Queen, and I got in close, only to discover that they had discarded their primary weapon, and the cape suddenly made more sense as well, because it hit something else, another pair of arms. These ones missing any sort of grasping unit, and instead terminating in a pair of thick, sharp-looking blades. Blades which began to glow as thermal systems kicked in along the edges. And then it became what the humans would call a brawl of epic proportions. We clashed, the claw-tipped tendrils of my Dread Queen trying to slip into the armor of my foe, but their blades cut through the tendrils with startling ease, leaving molten edges behind in their passing. Suddenly, they disengaged and used a hidden thruster port to put some distance between us, a hand flashing to the mech's hip, where a sidearm popped out of a hidden holster. They snatched it and mid-fight fanned the hammer, sending 12 high-explosive rounds streaking right towards me. Even as they landed, they were reloading, slapping another cylinder into place and fanning the hammer again, like some human gunfighter. The rounds did their job. They tore more tendrils and huge chunks of armor off my mech, and I saw sparks starting to fill my cockpit. But I had a few tricks up my proverbial sleeve still, and I initiated a tactic I hadn't used in a long, long time.
I dug into the ground, the tendrils turning into tips of the drill bit and allowing me to tunnel. I arced, coming up under the enemy mech, my remaining tendrils spreading open and then encircling it. Still, it managed to get off another volley before I trapped it. We struggled, and while one of the Dread Queen's tendrils arced towards the mech, one of their blade arms shifted and we clashed one last time, bestowing mortal blows to each other at the same exact time. Our mechs went still, and the power fluctuated before going dead. I triggered emergency releases, and the cockpit armor exploded outwards and away. I was expecting to see the same from my foe. But alas, I did not see the same, and for good reason. I had unintentionally gone for an actual kill blow, and the claw at the end of the tendril had pierced their cockpit housing, and I could see a strange green fluid leaking out around it. Had I just broken the one rule? I was soon to find out. The enemy mech shifted, and the sensor eyes focused on me before a hand rose. I thought at first it meant to crush me, but instead the hand closed around the cockpit housing.
My pilot is injured. Please retrieve my pilot and provide immediate medical attention.
The booming voice echoed from the mech, and I was startled at the little shiver of fear I felt at the voice. It gripped the housing firmly and then clenched, bending the metal and breaking all sorts of connectors, before it pulled the hunk of armor free and threw it at a good distance. I could not see inside the cockpit clearly, but I drew closer to see just who I'd been fighting. What I saw was humbling. A broken human woman, little more than a machine by now, held in a harness within a tank of life-giving fluid that had been ruptured. She was battle-scarred and clearly injured from all battles, as she was missing all of her limbs, save for one arm and head. A respiratory mask covered her mouth and nose, and she looked at me tightly from where she dangled. As I drew closer, I started to see red mixing with the green, and I knew that she was bleeding heavily as her skin started to turn paler. It seemed that she wanted to speak, but the mask prevented it. Carefully, I pulled it free, only to find that it was only part of a longer apparatus. A long breathing tube that had been slit down her throat, and it came out, slick with phlegm and blood. I cast that aside and stared into blue eyes that were glazed over by damage or drugs. Though they seemed sightless, they were fixated firmly on my own.
Why would you do this? You are in no condition to fight as you are, I asked,
And she smirked before coughing. Why? Because we wanted you to know that even if you break us, we'll still find a way to win, to beat you at your own game, and that a human like me, living on borrowed time, can humble someone like you, she said, her voice raspy.
Life signs fading. Immediate attention required.
The mech spoke again, and I huffed.
Foolish human, you should know your place,
I muttered, and she reached out, grabbing me by the collar as a fine close and pulling me close. I do. It's at the top. And then she grasped, a tickle of blood running down her nose as her brain hemorrhaged. She went limp suddenly. And that was it. Even the mech shut down, as though it had only been alive because of her. When it was all said and done, she was declared the posthumous winner of the tourney, and the humans left almost immediately after her body and mech had been retrieved. The rest of us got to watch, as no amount of censorship could keep the designs of her mech from being disseminated to the galaxy. She was right. We had broken humanity, but they had played our games and come out on top in the end. And now we were forced to watch as humanity put us in our place. To humanity, Captain Sophia Bradley and her mech Seraphim became symbols of revolution and perseverance, and her likeness was adopted as a symbol of countless revolutions across the galaxy. In time, the great houses lost all of their accumulated power, becoming shadows of their former glory. All because one human with a bone to pick and nothing left to lose. End of story. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Caspar Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon WRE, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.